Hello summoners and welcome back to Mobalytics, where today we have the patch 8.24 tier list Q&A. As always, we will start with the questions from YouTube. Starting this week from Exil said, I really don't understand why you guys think Udyr is S tier every patch. He's a terrible champion with easily exploitable weaknesses. For Udyr, I think that a lot of people, maybe even the Udyr mains themselves, we're struggling to see why he is a good champion. I think maybe some inherent bias in there. There's almost no reason not to recommend this champion, especially for a lower elo. I think you might be able to make an argument for higher elo, sure, but there's no reason whatsoever to think this champion is not S tier. Now that you can take attack speed, AD, and armor in your runes, you can clear the jungle very efficiently, you can gank, you can 1v1, you can fight over crabs, you're a good early game duelist. This champion has everything to carry and climb. With Udyr, you will often hear the argument that, oh, he gets kited, it's impossible to play him and the reason he's not good in competitive play is because he gets kited. And while that's true, I think that's a very weak argument. Every champion has some kind of weakness. You could say that Kha'Zix has a problem if he falls behind and the enemy gets a lot of armor, but isn't that true for every assassin? And isn't it true that for every champion just like Udyr, he will get kited if he's not ahead or so tanky? The thing is that even the champions around him are worse at kiting than before. It's not an ardent censor meta with people picking things like Janna and Lulu to constantly kite Udyr, Xayah ADC, stuff like that. It's usually things like Heimer who, while has CC, you can kind of just run through sometimes. There are a lot of squishy champions running around and a lot of burst champions which Udyr does well into, and not a lot of peeling supports. I agree if that the meta was like Xayah Janna bot lane with Ardent Censor, yeah, that's really tough for Udyr, but that's not the meta at all. This champion does a lot of damage, good at skirmishing. I just think maybe you're playing him wrong or he isn't being utilized effectively. On almost every server, there are people doing well in high elo with him. Not great, they're not rank 1, but they can do okay with him. So I don't see why he wouldn't at least be A tier bare minimum. Next up, we have a question from Guillermo Duncan saying, why isn't Ezreal in the tier list? I think he does well against mages in the bot lane in a mobile champs because he can land Qs over and over and stack up gold from Klepto, and his mid game is disgusting. We have kind of touched on Ezreal before, but I would like to revisit him due to your question because none of what you're saying is wrong. I would say that everything you've said is correct, except for one thing, and that disregards that Ezreal has a very high skill cap and mastery. He's easy to play at a floor level and from a very early perspective, but as far as playing him to his maximum potential, he's pretty tough. With Ezreal, you can show a lot of mastery by playing more aggressive, by dominating and using your poke in lane, and typically you just do see Ezreals having this shield around them, this shield of passivity, where they're farming from max range, doing nothing but kiting with Iceborne Gauntlet, and right now I don't think that really carries. There are a lot of other champions who can play way more aggressive and have lane pressure, as well as much more late game pressure than Ezreal, and that's why I think a lot of people are struggling on him. He is a champion that is fun to play, so people are going to continue to play him, and as far as Ezreal being in a good spot, I think this is the best he's been in quite a while. They did just give him some direct buffs, and Kleptomancy got buffed, so I do think if you're going to play him, now is the time, but he really hasn't been that good in solo queue for a while compared to some of the mages, and Draven and Lucian. Travis Hughes said, where is Galio? I feel like the changes he got were a great thing for solo queue, the mana costs on his queue were a huge reason he wasn't good, but he feels really good now. This I totally agree with you, and even in the video I did mention that I think Galio might rise up. I do think Galio is much better at the moment. I think his wave clear is a bit better on his Q as well. That mana cost is really nice. Historically, he really just wasn't that good for solo queue, but now you might be able to play him as a burst mage, and I could see many reasons why he could be picked at the higher tiers and maybe even in middle tiers. I could see Galio being good, so don't be afraid to give him a try. We'll have to see how it pans out over the next couple of weeks, but I do agree with you. I think he's much better. Our last question coming from YouTube this week, the Double V said, there are so many champions on the tier list now, what happened? I would say the best explanation for this is because it's the preseason, which means a lot more things in general are viable and the game is full of utter chaos. I think the meta will need time to settle, and typically during these times and during the preseason, a lot more champions are going to be viable. Right now, in general, mages are very good. The other thing is that the top tier champions like LeBlanc, while receiving nerfs, didn't receive a big enough nerf to fall off. So you have a lot of different things. You have things that counter the OP picks, a good example being LeBlanc getting countered by Cassiopeia, which has shot way up. You have things that were OP like Victor, now moving down a bit, and new tanks rising in the top lane. I think our prediction that tanks will be better in the future and people should be playing tanks is another reason you have more champions on our tier list this time. I think a lot of people should respect tanks and play tanks because they're great right now and they're going to be great for competitive play. When all top laners and all junglers want to play carries, and when everybody is playing burst mages, the best thing you can do is play tanks. There's just not enough sustained DPS to kill them right now. There's not a Xayah, there's not a Tristana, there's not a Caitlyn who can cut through them at the moment. We have a question this week from Instagram with GuildXA saying, why isn't Fiora S tier top lane? She had a lot of good buffs in the last patches without a nerf, and some other champions' nerfs made her pretty strong. Much like Ezreal, I think Fiora is in the best spot she has been in a very long time. I do think the rune changes were better for bruisers. This is something we mentioned on patch 8.23. The fact that you can go AD, and armor makes your laning phase great, and that's exactly what you want. And on Fiora, attack speed is nice for sure, but you didn't always need it from the precision tree. Imagine before on the old runes, if you wanted to go Conquer into Resolve, you had attack speed and health, which is no AD at all, which is terrible for Fiora. But now if you want to go Conquer into Demolish and Second Wind, you can do that, which makes her better. The one caveat to this is that Fiora is not S tier because she is not a prototypically good meta champion for solo queue and solo climbing. Right now the meta is very early game focused. It's all about taking towers as fast as you can in the early game and ending the game before 20 minutes, making the enemy team rage and FF and tilt, and Fiora just needs a little bit too long to scale. If the meta slows down, or if you're talking in terms of competitive play, I do think Fiora will be picked in pro play because the games are going to be much slower there and you have time to counter those tanks and scale up. I just think right now in solo queue, she can't be put S tier because she takes 3 items to win instead of 2 items or 1.5 items. And our last question this week, coming from the blog from Ricardo Fernandez, saying, can you just give your guys' thoughts on NiKo? Can you give us some thoughts on NiKo? Okay, how to make this sound like I'm not a salty player? Well, all joking aside, I am not a big fan of this champion and her interaction with the game. I think a champion whose entire job is to deny information is kind of unfun to play against. So far, I haven't really enjoyed the fact that when you press tab, her level is deceptive. I'll give you a perfect example. I was playing mid versus her, and it said she was level 4. When I pressed tab, then she walked out of a bush and was level 6 and killed me with her ultimate. I think that's because she recently mimicked a Lucian and it said she was level 4, and I kind of have a problem with that. I feel like a champion who denies information just isn't really that fun to play against, even if the argument against it would be like, well, you know NiKo's in the game, you know she's going to trick you, so you should just be ready for that. While that's true, and that's definitely a fair and reasonable point, I just think it's not that enjoyable. However, her current power and her current way of being in the game, I think NiKo is very strong. I think NiKo has pretty high numbers and does a lot of damage, as you probably have seen so far. So I think that next time when we finally rate her on the tier list, she'll be somewhere like B or A tier. I think she's pretty good right now, and if you want to play her and climb with her, I would say by all means go for it. This has been the Mobalytics patch 8.24 tier list Q&A. Make sure you check out our brand new Mobalytics 2.0 product at mobalytics.gg, your all-in-one platform for improving at League of Legends.